The two explosions that killed 3 people and injured over 100 at the finishing line of the Boston Marathon on Monday made headlines right across the world and in China the next day. And when 2 of the victims, one fatal, turned out to be Chinese, coverage of the atrocity in Chinese media became even more intense. China's official news agency Xinhua reported that a Chinese student had died but did not name her, but the young woman killed was later named as Liu Lingzi and described as a graduate of Beijing Institute of Technology, where she'd studied international trade. She was originally from the northeastern city of Shenyang and was a graduate student at Boston University. Meanwhile, Chinese consular officials said the survivor was another Boston University student from China, Zhou Danling, and added that she was badly injured and in hospital. Zhou was a friend of the dead woman and a graduate of Wuhan University. Well, for an idea of how Chinese net users have been reacting to this atrocity, let's cross over to the newsroom now and our researcher, Julia Liu. Well, Julia, so just how much do Chinese net users know about this case, these incidents, and what are they saying?
Well, just as you said, the story has got full coverage here on Chinese media, including TV news and news web portals. And there are also plenty of special features and commentaries as well. So Chinese net users are basically fully aware of what's happened and the latest updates. And as for the reactions, first of all, of course, many have expressed their condolence for the victims. Well, actually, the topic Boston booming on China's equivalent of Twitter, Weibo.com, has got almost 1 million posts. And the poster called Small Chocolate says, "The tragedy is heartbreaking news for me. I'm a fan of marathons, and the spirit of the marathon is peace and freedom. Well, these terrorists are just insane." And of course, many net users here express their particular sorrow over the 2 Chinese girls involved. This poster says on Weibo.com, "I can't imagine how much pain she suffered in the last minute. Everything seems so insignificant in the face of death. I just hope she will rest in peace and hope everyone I know stays safe and sound." And Xiangshan Yunye says on China.com.cn, "This sad story underlines that it's not just the US that's the victim of terrorist attacks. China and any other country is just as vulnerable. And it should just remind people of the importance of cooperation among all countries and organizations to crack down on terrorism."
Well, Julia, so some in the US have said that this sort of random attack is simply not preventable and part of the price of living in a free society. But the US has massively stepped up anti-terrorism efforts in the last decade or so, certainly since 9/11. Do people here feel anything can be learned from their experiences here in China?
Well, this has definitely triggered a lot of the online discussion over the anti-terrorist measures that the US has been working on since the 9/11 attacks. And in fact, many people think that China can learn a lot from the US on this. Actually, a poll on Sohu.com shows about 80% of more than 2,000 pollsters think that the US is a good example for China to follow in terms of counter-terrorism. But there are also some net users who view that this case also highlights problems in the US attitude, at least in this case. Feng Chuangzhi says on 163.com. "Obama set himself up as a hero that stopped terrorism, and there's currently a feeling among US officials that terrorism is no longer the major threat it was. But this case proves that is far from true. Why is it so easy to place so many bombs? And was the bomber just too clever, or the local police are not doing their job? There's a lot to think about." Well, this poster on QQ.com identifies what he views as one feeling in the US today and has one specific piece of advice. And he has this to say: "I think there are too many counter-terrorism agencies in the US who don't cooperate properly. They get huge amounts of information but only analyze a small portion of it. And what they need to do is make better use of all this information they have."
Now, one last question concerning the coverage of this, Julia. Chinese media have had virtually wall-to-wall reporting on the bombings, yet at almost the same time a fire killing 14 people in Hubei province was almost ignored. Why do net users feel there's such a contrast in press attention for these 2 stories?
Oh yes, actually the fire occurred in Yijing city in Hubei province last weekend, or just a day before the bombing in Boston. And even before the Boston attack, it wasn't getting anything like the same coverage. And in fact, this is something that many net users have complained about, with many quite cynical about the reasons. And comments like this one from Kui Xing Dian Zhuangyuan are very common on the microblogging site, Weibo.com. The state-run television CCTV seems more like an American network in recent days. Why is it that a fire that killed 14 people here is not considered as important as a bombing in some other country? Well, that's of course because it improves the opportunity of a cover-up. But there are other net users like this poster, Aki FY, who feels it's not all the fault of the media, and she has this to say. Well, my question is, with so many people criticizing the Chinese media for not paying enough attention to the Hubei fire, why am I seeing all these posters that are much more enthusiastically commenting on the Boston bombing rather than on any domestic news? And finally, I'll finish up with this interesting comment from Xu Wenguang, who writes on Weibo.com. We can see people posting condolences for the dead, others considering the cause, others spreading news about Boston citizens helping each other, and even those who are gloating. How we respond defines who we are, and who are you?
Okay, thanks for looking into that first, Julia. And that was China Take researcher Julia Liu with online reaction here in China to those bombings at the Boston Marathon and the death of a Chinese student in them. Next here on China Take, some of the top trending phrases on China's most popular search engines.